Okay, well, let's get rolling. We've got great attendance here, so we might as well get started. How this is, so for those of you who haven't attended here before, we're going to, I just do a little bit of an introduction, then we're going to hop into the presentation, which is the main event for tonight, on who protects people from noise pollution. In June, we had a political science student who presented on motor vehicle laws and the motor vehicle laws for noise that apply from the federal, provincial to municipal levels. And that was really well attended, and I keep going back to that presentation quite a bit because it's really important. There's gaps there. And then the other thing that people have been asking me over and over again is, oh, well, who protects us from noise pollution? Who protects people? And what about wildlife? So initially, this was going to be both about people and wildlife, but both subjects deserve all of their own time and all of their own discussion. So Dewey will be presenting. She's on screen here, and she's one of the university students, and she will be presenting in January on the laws that protect wildlife. Well, in Canada, which laws protect wildlife from noise? But tonight, we're talking about us. And I'm able to get away from Toronto on a fairly regular basis, and I feel the difference in my cells. It is amazing how when you can not, I mean, I'm a kind of a wired individual, but when I can step down and not have that background hum or be constantly distracted and that cognitive load, it's amazing. It's amazing. And I wish that for all of us. And that is my goal that we can create a city that is healthy, that is livable, that where soundscapes are acceptable. And it doesn't impact our health. That's going to be a harder nut to crack because health impacts of noise can start at a very low level, but we can certainly work towards those goals. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, doing a little introduction of us, and then we're going to hop right over into the presentation. So with that, just going to turn this into slideshow mode here. There we go. Who protects us from noise pollution? So you have already talked about what we're going to be talking about. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, and then we'll also do a little bit of a summary and a wrap up. So you do have control of your video and your microphones. If you don't mind to put yourself on mute, if you came off mute and turn off your camera during the presentation, it just reduces distractions. And then we will have Q&A afterwards, and we'll take them from the chat and also from people who put up their hands. And as always, please be respectful to each other online and in the chat. So, No More Noise Toronto, we are focused on the noises that wake us up, keep us up, and disturb us day and night. And we just federally incorporated as a not for profit. We are 3 years young. I called us toddlers the other day because that is kind of where it feels like even though we've been going for 3 years, we're just getting going because now as a federal not for profit, we can access funding, we can go for grants, we can do all kinds of things. And what we've been doing over the last 3 years has been engaging and educating people, and we've been doing it through webinars like this. And the other thing that we're developing, we've kind of been learning as we go and how we fight this noise thing, is we also are elected officials. Many of them don't know what to do. They are just, they get noise exemption permits, and what's the process around that? And so our elected officials need advice, and that's something that we're doing. But we're also providing solutions to cities, and we're presenting ideas. And just yesterday, we met with Councillor Pasternak from Downsview regarding Rogers Stadium, and he was like, Ingrid, you're the one who I'm looking to come for solutions. And so I have another meeting after this tonight to present solutions so that he can take that to a meeting tomorrow morning. So there is so much support here. It's amazing. And part of the reason why we've come so far so fast is because of our relationship with the University of Toronto. Things have happened by just the slimmest of threads. It's been amazing. But by me being at somebody's house and them talking about a student placement program and me sending an email, that's how the first student came. And that was 3 years ago. And now Leora and Dewey are students number 9 and 10. So there's been a lot of learning and a lot of growing for both of us, for all of us, and it's been a very rewarding experience. So we have students with both in geography, senior geography students, and also environmental studies. And Leora is a fourth year environmental studies student. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and she can start and introduce herself. and take it away. And you are on mute as well. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Liora, and I'm a fourth year environmental studies student at the University of Toronto, like Ingrid just said. And today I'm going to be presenting on urban noise pollution laws and regulations and how people are or are not protected from noise on a federal, provincial, and municipal level. So to start, noise, although an invisible pollutant, is recognized by the World Health Organization as a significant environmental health concern linked to sleep disturbance, cardiovascular disease, and reduced well-being. Yet noise rarely triggers urgency in policy. So today's purpose and approach maps where protections against noise do and do not exist in Canada across three different levels: federal, provincial, and municipal. What becomes clear is that stringent protections are needed at all levels but do not exist. Instead, Canadians, specifically Torontonians in this presentation's context, live under a fragmented patchwork of guidelines rather than enforceable health-based protections. The same applies, sorry. So to start, we're going to start with the federal overview. So at the federal level, Canada does not recognize noise as pollution in environmental law. There is no national standard for safe community noise levels, no federal monitoring program, and no enforceable protections against chronic noise exposures. Responsibility is instead split across agencies, provinces, and municipalities. So to start looking at the SEPA and the Right to Healthy Environment, SEPA is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, and it has been Canada's core environmental law since 1999. And its first major reform, Bill S5 in 2023, so in over 20 years, introduced the country's first ever right to a healthy environment, framed as strengthening protections against pollution and supporting disproportionately affected communities. However, this reform did not expand SEPA's definition of toxicity. SEPA still regulates substances based on bioaccumulation, persistence, and inherent toxicity, meaning chemical pollutants. So Bill S5 focuses on the management of toxic substances rather than redefining pollution and adding new pollutants such as noise. As a result, the new right to a healthy environment applies only to toxic chemicals and not to other environmental stressors such as noise. Because noise falls outside of federal pollution definitions, Canada has no federal noise protections or standards, which pushes the responsibility down to sectors and subnational governments. So on the slide, there's a chart of SEPA 1999. So SEPA 1999, as I said, it was about persistence and bioaccumulation toxicity. And then Bill S5 essentially just helped manage and mitigate toxic chemicals and added more toxic chemicals, but they were all chemical components and not other pollutants. So for noise management in Canada, there's no single coordinated federal noise policy. Transport Canada, and on the slide, there's a chart explaining the fragmented guidelines and who governs what. So Transport Canada regulates transportation, so noise, aircraft, rail, and marine being things like shipping. Provinces regulate industrial and environmental noise. Municipalities regulate local noise through bylaws. Health Canada recognizes the health impacts of noise, but cannot set or enforce national noise limits, as its role is limited to research, guidance, and recommendations, such as those outlined in Health Canada's 2023 Guidance for Evaluation of Human Health Effects and Impact Assessments, specifically on noise. And it's not a regulation, it's just a recommendation. Because of this,
Liora, if you
yeah,
could please just slow down just a little bit, that would
yeah.
be excellent. Okay, thank you.
Because of the structural fragmentation at the federal level, the burden shifts to provinces where major gaps in protection continue. So in this slide, there's a chart with the managing body and the noise enforcement that they regulate. So Transport Canada, as I said, transportation noise, marine, shipping, rail, aircraft. Health Canada gives guidelines and provides recommendations, but it cannot regulate or enforce limits. Environment and Climate Change Canada is what SEPA is under, so the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which excludes noise as pollution and has no federal noise standards, monitoring, or enforcement regarding noise. So to start the provincial overview, at the provincial level, Ontario has noise-related documents, but none create enforceable protections. Noise in our environment suggests acceptable levels of 40 to 60 decibels, but this is guidance only and not a required standard. The Healthy Environment and Climate Change Guideline 2018 mentions environmental exposures, but does not identify noise as a health hazard. So provincially, noise is acknowledged but not regulated, creating a major policy gap. This omission matters because Ontario's health legislation determines what local health authorities, including Toronto Public Health, may treat as a public health issue. So Ontario has four key documents related to noise, but none provide enforceable health-based protections. So firstly, noise in our environment recognizes noise, but is not a legal standard. And you see what I'm saying is reiterated in the chart on this page with the document recognizes noise or enforces protections with checks and X's. So noise in our environment recognizes noise, but it is not a legal standard. Neither the Healthy Environments and Climate Change Guideline nor the Health Protection and Promotion Act identify noise as a health standard, so provincial public health units are not required to address it. The Environmental Protection Act acknowledges sound and vibration as contaminants, but lacks limits, monitoring requirements, or enforcement tools. So across all four frameworks, noise is either recognized but unenforced or excluded entirely without provincial standards. So therefore, municipalities are left to address noise reactively through bylaws rather than proactively as a health risk governed by the province. So the biggest gap is the provincial gap in municipal policy because Toronto Public Health relies on two provincial documents for direction, the Healthy Environments and Climate Change Guideline, which lists the environmental exposures public health must address, and the Health Protection and Promotion Act, which outlines mandatory health programs. So the key point here is what is not listed, noise. It does not appear in either framework. Because noise is excluded as a required exposure or program area, Toronto Public Health is neither mandated nor empowered to address chronic noise exposure as a public health issue. The province effectively recognizes noise as harmful, but it does not classify it as an enforceable health hazard, leaving municipalities without higher level support. So the chart on this slide has on the left, health environments and climate change guidelines, specifically requirement 7, where hazards are listed. And on the right, Health Protections and Promotion Act, where they're mandatory health programs and services that municipalities in Ontario need to have. So for Healthy Environments Climate Change Guideline, climate change is listed as one, hazardous contaminants, radiation exposure, extreme weather, indoor and outdoor air pollutants are the main contaminants that are listed, and noise is omitted. And for Health Protection and Promotion Acts, the mandatory services are community sanitation, safe drinking water systems, control of infectious diseases, promotion and prevention of disease and injury, and family health services. So once again, noise is omitted from the services and programs that municipalities in Ontario are required to have. So to move into the municipal overview of focusing on Toronto, because Ontario does not mandate public health protections against noise, responsibility at the municipal level shifts from health to enforcement. In Toronto, noise is not treated as a health hazard, but as a bylaw issue. The city's role is therefore limited to responding to complaints and enforcing the noise bylaw rather than proactively reducing harmful exposure. Noise from construction, nightlife, traffic, and amplified sound is managed as a disturbance to residents, not as a cardiovascular, sleep, or cognitive health risk, despite clear evidence of those impacts. Toronto Public Health cannot intervene without a provincial mandate, and Environment and Climate Change Canada has no jurisdiction over community noise. As a result, the first point of contact for residents is municipal enforcement, which is reactive, complaint-driven, and uneven across neighborhoods, especially where residents have fewer resources or time to file complaints, making noise an equity issue as well. So on this slide is a comparison between Toronto's Noise Action Plan in 2019 and the Noise Action Plan update from 2025, which gave feedback on what has happened and has not happened since 2019, what recommendations were enacted and what still needs to happen. So this chart shows the development from the 2019 to the 2025 update. So first, to start with the purpose row, it reflects a shift from proposing coordinated actions in 2019 to reporting progress and implementing mitigation measures in 2025. But the role of Toronto Public Health remains mostly unchanged, which is the next role. Because it's still the next row, Toronto Public Health in 2019 was advisory, and in 2025 still provides just advisory support and cannot give direct mandates. But Toronto Public Health does identify noise as a health issue, and contributes research and interdivisional recommendation, but it just lacks regulatory authority because noise is not recognized provincially as a required health exposure. Then next, the noise bylaw row shows the most concrete change. In 2019, refinement was recommended, and in 2025, these refinements were implemented with lower nighttime limits for amplified sound, a decibel cap for stationary vehicles, and inclusion of vibration in the definition of unreasonable and persistent noise. But while meaningful, these remain bylaws, which are enforceable only through complaint-based investigations rather than proactive public health protections, as bylaws are inherently reactive, unevenly enforced, and dependent on residents' capacity to report issues. Next, the construction and traffic noise row shows that broad recommendations in 2019 evolved into specific actions in 2025, including technology pilots, freight strategies, EV fleet transitions, and expanded traffic calming. And then next in the community engagement row, there were also progresses in the 2025 update, which continues collaboration and recommends studying bylaw impacts and using 311 submissions for data collection, which No More Noise Toronto has also been participating in through its Not 311 reporting system, where residents can report noise complaints at any time, and No More Noise Toronto has collected over 12,000 complaints, helping with the citizen complaining and research for community engagement. Overall, progress has been made, especially in enforcement tools, but the structural limitations persist. The city can strengthen bylaws, but without provincial mandate recognizing noise as a health hazard, Toronto cannot shift from enforcement-based to health-based protections or health-based protections that are backed with concrete enforcement. Next, there was an environmental noise study in Toronto, which was done in 2017 by Toronto Public Health and the Toronto Metropolitan University, who conducted the environmental noise study to measure exposure citywide and provide evidence for municipal planning and public health work. The findings showed that environmental noise is not just merely an annoyance, but a public health issue linked to stress, sleep disruption, and increased cardiovascular risk. Toronto's citywide 24-hour average was 62.9 decibels, which is significantly higher than the World Health Organization's threshold of 40 decibels at night for sleep and 55 decibels during the day for cardiovascular protection, meaning Toronto's baseline is already in the medically harmful range. The image on the slide on the left shows that 62.9 decibels falls between the noise levels of a regular conversation and a passenger vehicle. The follow-up report, How Loud is Too Loud, also in 2017, stated that the study was explicitly produced to determine whether current noise levels could negatively impact health and to inform revisions to the noise bylaw. Both documents draw directly on World Health Organization thresholds. The reports also outline that what protection could look like, noise-conscious land use planning, acoustic building design, traffic management strategies, public education, and improvements to the noise bylaw. However, neither report requires any of these measures. There are still no enforceable municipal decibel limits, no permanent monitoring system, no penalties for chronic environmental noise, and no mechanism to disproportionately expose neighborhoods. Together, the environmental noise study and How Loud is Too Loud deliver the same conclusion. Toronto's clear scientific evidence that chronic noise is harming health, but there is no binding policy framework to act on that evidence. The city knows how loud is too loud. The problem is that it is already that loud with no health-based protections in place. So the chart on the right is the World Health Organization, the WHO status of decibel limits with, as I said, 40 nighttime noise limit, recommended maximum for protecting sleep and cardiovascular health, and 55 decibels daytime noise limit to protect cardiovascular disease and annoyance. And Toronto is 62.9 decibels on average, which is outside the unhealthy range, with the decibel scale on the left just to make what a decibel is more tangible. Next is the Toronto Noise Bylaw. As Toronto does have a bylaw dedicated to noise, it's Chapter 591, and it is the city's main legal tool for managing noise and what it regulates and does not regulate. It reflects and here's where the core protection gap is reflected. The bylaw sets limits for specific sources, amplified sound and musical instruments, 50 decibels at night, 55 decibels during the day, construction hours, loading and unloading operations, motor vehicles, and stationary sources such as air conditioning units, which they set at 45 decibels at night and 50 decibels during the day. In these areas, enforcement powers are drawn on paper as officers can take measurements, order compliance issues, and issue fines up to $100,000 per offense with additional daily penalties. However, while on paper it sounds promising, enforcement is very narrow because it is an entirely complaint-driven system with municipal licensing and standards and Toronto Public Health not proactively monitoring noise, and investigations depend on residents filing complaints, meaning enforcement varies across neighborhoods depending on residents' capacity and time to advocate for themselves, as well as their capacity to know Chapter 591 and what is their right to complain about and what isn't in their right to complain about, which is also an equity and knowledge gap. Chapter 591 does not regulate ambient citywide noise, which makes up the constant background exposure in Toronto. And 591 also does not adopt any World Health Organization health-based thresholds for sleep or cardiovascular health. And it does not address continuous traffic noise, even though that is the most harmful and widespread source of exposure. Finally, the bylaw includes no requirement for ongoing monitoring, so the city has no continuous data showing where noise is worsening or who is most affected, which is why 311 and not 311 noise reporting is so important and effective, because it maps where the reports are happening and what time they happen at, and it puts them into a combined database. So on the slide, the chart on the left of it has what Chapter 591 regulates and what it does not protect. So just to recap, Chapter 591 regulates amplifying sound and musical instruments, construction hours, loading and unloading, motor vehicles, 92 decibels idle, 96 under load, and stationary sources and AC units. And more importantly, what it does not protect is no citywide ambient noise standards. It does not incorporate any World Health Organization base limits of the 40 and 55 decibels as discussed on the previous slide. And there's no sleep or cardiovascular protection thresholds. There's no protection from continuous traffic noise, and there's also no monitoring standard. So there's no plan for them to put 591 into effect. So summary of protection gaps. So the chart on the slide shows how at the federal level, noise is not recognized as pollution under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Although Health Canada acknowledges its health risks, there are still no national noise standards or protections. At the provincial level, Ontario provides environmental health guidance, but noise is not included in mandatory public health requirements, monitoring, or municipal mandates. And at the municipal level, Toronto regulates noise through Chapter 591, which targets specific activities rather than chronic background exposure. While Toronto's noise action plan has improved over the last 5 years, as shown in the original one and the update slide, no level of government provides complete or adequate protection, which means that Toronto residents remain exposed to medically harmful noise at the average of 62.9 decibels. Despite clear evidence from the environmental noise study and from international health organizations accredited. So this slide has a chart with Canada, Ontario, and Toronto, and the three main protection gaps that each of them have. So Canada, SEPA does not recognize noise as pollution. There's no national, there's no national noise standards. Health agencies cannot enforce limits, only advise. So Health Canada, while they have a comprehensive noise impact assessment document, which will be linked in the appendix later, it's only advisory. They have no actual policy power. And responsibility remains fragmented across all sectors, as mentioned before, with travel and health programs. And then in Ontario, noise is not included in mandatory public health requirements. There's no mandate for municipalities to protect residents from noise, which means that such as municipalities like Toronto, it's up to their own regulatory standards, which are weaker than the provinces. It provides guidance, but no monitoring requirement for municipal noise protection. And then lastly, to recap Toronto, Chapter 591 regulates activities, but not ambient exposure, which is a big city like Toronto is filled with ambient noise exposure, and it's complaint-driven enforcement only, with no protection from chronic traffic noise and only idle vehicles, which even idle vehicles is very loose protection because it's a citizen reporting system. So summary of noise protections for humans. So the charts on the slide compares what each level of government actually provides in enforceable noise protection across 5 categories: recognizing noise as a pollutant, applying World Health Organization thresholds, setting ambient exposure limits, proactive enforcement, and uniform monitoring. Canada, Ontario, and Toronto all receive X's. So for enforceable, so just to go over this chart quickly. So enforceable policy protections for Canada: recognize noise as a pollutant. No. World Health Organization, implement World Health Organization threshold. No. Ambient noise exposure standards. No. Proactive enforcement. No. And uniform monitoring systems. Also no. So you're going to notice a bit of a pattern with this. So Ontario recognizes noise as a pollutant. No. Implements World Health Organization thresholds. No. Ambient noise exposure standards. No. Proactive enforcement. Also no. And uniform monitoring. No. And then lastly, Toronto recognizes noise as a pollutant. Also no. Implements World Health Organization thresholds. No. Ambient noise exposure standards. No. Proactive enforcement. No. And uniform monitoring. Once again, also no. And then on the federal, in other words, every level lacks enforceable health-based protections. On the federal side, Health Canada recognizes noise as harmful, but there are no standards or legislation, and noise is not included under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Provincially, Ontario indirectly acknowledges noise, but does not classify it as a required public health hazard, leaving no mandates, limits, or monitoring. Municipally, Toronto Public Health understands the risks proven in the environmental noise study and how loud is too loud, which both were published by Toronto Public Health, but it has no legal authority to protect residents from chronic noise exposure. And Chapter 591, the bylaw, only addresses disturbances. So everything I just said was in the chart on the right with the government level: Canada, Ontario, and Toronto. So Canada acknowledges noise is harmful, yes, in their Health Canada guidance and their noise impact assessment tools. Legally protects residents from noise, no, because there's no federal regulation or standard to trickle down to the rest of the Canadian government levels, such as provincial and municipal. Ontario only indirectly acknowledges noise exists, but it does not list it as a health hazard. And so they do not have any mandate, no limits, no monitoring. So there's no legal protection for residents from noise. And Toronto yes, they do acknowledge noise is harmful in their reports that I just mentioned, which will also be linked in the appendix, but they do not actually regulate. They do not legally protect residents from noise because Chapter 591 regulates disturbances, but not chronic exposure. And due to its citizen reporting setup, it's not as effective as policy should be. Sorry. So Chapter 591 only addresses disturbances, and across all 3 levels, the pattern remains the same. Noise is recognized as harmful, but residents are not legally protected from it across any government level in Canada. In short, noise is consistently recognized as harmful across jurisdictions, but because no level of government provides health-based enforceable protections, Toronto residents remain exposed to medically harmful noise without a system designed to prevent it. Not because Toronto doesn't know how loud is too loud, but because every level of government knows and still does not intervene to avoid chronic exposure and health impacts in Canada, Ontario, or Toronto. So this is the appendix, which I'm not sure how Ingrid's going to share it, but I know she's going to make it accessible somehow. But these are all the documents that I spoke about and overviewed about noise are all in the appendix.
That is great, Leora. Thank you so much. So did everybody keep up with all of that? A whole bunch of information there. You can go ahead and stop sharing. Thanks so much. So everyone, so with that, I think we basically learned that there's just a whole bunch of X's all across the board, which I think we all inherently knew, right? Seems all very logical, and yeah, this is why it's so bad now, is because there has been no protections. Noise has been completely undervalued as a health hazard. And so I was very thankful that Leora went in and dug into all those details, and now we have it in black and white in front of us. So I'm going to start off by inviting people to put a question in the chat. I'm also going to ask people to put up their hands to ask questions as well, but I'm going to start off with the first question, which is to Leora about all of this. So we've got our federal, provincial, municipal standards. If we were to push anywhere, where should we start?
I touched on it in my presentation a lot with the municipal gap in the provincial level. So if we want meaningful change, the most effective place to start is at the provincial level. Right now, Toronto Public Health cannot regulate noise because Ontario does not classify noise as a public health hazard or make noise exposure a mandatory area of public health action or programming. So if the province added chronic environmental noise to the list of required health exposures and programs, municipalities would no longer be limited to bylaws and complaint-driven systems, as they would be legally empowered to protect residents through preventative health-based regulations. And that one shift would remove the structural constraints, blocking both enforcement and innovation regarding noise in Toronto. And it would allow groups such as No More Noise Toronto and other advocates in the same vicinity to concretely advocate for a domino effect of protections across all levels of government in Canada.
Yeah, thank you. And so this is something, so when Toronto Public Health was looking at its noise action plan, and a number of us have deputed a number of times, and I was actually advocating that noise should be listed as part of that requirement 7. And Councillor Chris Moyes, who's the chair of the Toronto Board of Health, we actually had a meeting, and he said, well, Ingrid, that would be wonderful to do, but then Toronto would have to work with every single other Board of Health to try and change that. So that's not Toronto Public Health's mandate, but that's where we could start to push. And if there is a body, a provincial body that starts to that can help us, that we can align with to start pushing there, would very much like to do so. Because this is so many people have said, Ingrid, Toronto Public Health can shut down a restaurant. Why can't they, for food safety? Why can't they do something for noise? And well, it's listed right there, right? It's listed in right in those requirements. So that's the policy that needs to start to change. So with